As we continue our technical training series on Brightside players, we come now to the topic of player setup. Player setup is probably the single most important subject to understand when it comes to using Brightside players. In fact, I think probably we receive more calls and more requests to our support engineers on this subject than just about any other. The key thing to understand is that a Brightside player must be set up at least once before you can use it reliably on a day-to-day basis. There are several different ways that you can publish projects to Brightside players. For example, we offer publishing via the direct old school sneakernet method, where you simply publish to a memory card and you put the memory card in the player and the player will run. We also support publishing over a local area network from our BrightAuthor software direct to the player. We support publishing via a web server. We call this method simple file networking. And we support publishing via our own service called the Brightside Network. In a moment I'm going to talk about each of these in a little more detail, and then in future modules I'll demonstrate how to set up a player for each of these methods. But the key important point here to understand is, once a Brightside player is set up for one of these methods, it will not work for any of the other methods. These four publishing methods are mutually exclusive. So for example, if I set up a player to work in the simple file networking mode, I will not be able to manage that player on the Brightside network, and I will not be able to manage that player via local area networking. These four publishing methods are mutually exclusive, so it's very, very important to think now about which publishing method you intend to use and then proceed down that path. Publishing via an SD card, what we call local publishing, is simply to publish directly to an SD memory card from the BrightAuthor software. It writes all the data the player needs to know directly to the SD card, and the SD card is then taken to the player, inserted in the player, and the player runs the project. Frankly, this is the only option you have with players that do not have a network connection, like our Model HD120, or any of our other players that may simply not be connected to a network. Local publishing is the only option in that case. Local area networking is the method that's used to publish over a local area network from BrightAuthor directly to the player. No server is required, no middleware, no other software or services are needed. Simply a model player with a network connection and a copy of BrightAuthor. You need to be together on the same local area network. The number of players to manage shouldn't be particularly large, or this method will be inconvenient, since you can only publish to one player at a time using this method. And what actually happens is that BrightAuthor is writing through the player directly to the player's memory card. But this is a very good solution where you have a small number of players to manage and you're all together on the same LAN. Also, there's a back channel where BrightAuthor can detect from the player some basic information about the player's status. So you'll be able to see that the player is online and what the player is doing as BrightAuthor gets that information out of the player. Simple file networking is used when players are no longer local to you. They might be spread around the world. It's a global solution, and it requires a web server between your copy of BrightAuthor and the player. A network connection is required between your instance of BrightAuthor, and a network connection is required to the player, and that web server needs to be visible in both directions, meaning that BrightAuthor can see the web server and the Brightside player can see the web server. Presentations are delivered to the web server. There's no direct connection to the BrightAuthor player. And the user of BrightAuthor will need some method to transfer files to that web server. Perhaps that web folder is mounted as a local volume, or perhaps FTP is used to upload files to that web server because it's in another location. somewhere else in the world, and it cannot be accessed as a local share. There's, as I mentioned earlier, there is no direct connection between Brightauthor and the Brightside players in this case. And I mentioned players plural because it may well be that there are multiple Brightside players receiving content from a single web folder. In fact, this is a convenient way to broadcast a presentation with a single publish to a large number of players around the world. This is a one-way connection. There's no feedback from the player back through the web server to Brightauthor. So sometimes referred to as fire and forget, meaning the project is uploaded and published to the web folder, and you rely on the players to download that project on their own. Again, this goes back to the point I made earlier that there is no direct connection between Brightauthor and the player. But this solution costs nothing and can manage a very large number of players anywhere in the world with proper attention to setup. And then finally, publishing via the Brightside Network. This is a scalable service that we operate up in the cloud to allow Brightside players to receive content and schedules from Brightauthor no matter where they are in the world. The Brightside Network steps in here where I had originally shown a web server. Instead, this is a group of servers that we manage up in the public internet. So on the Brightauthor side, you'll need a connection to the internet, and on the Brightside player side, you'll need a connection to the internet, but that's all you'll need. Everything takes place via the Brightside service. It's a subscription service. It's not free. It's not expensive, but it's not free, and it's bidirectional. You will know the status of every player in your network. Brightside owns responsibility for maintaining the servers, maintaining redundant servers, and keeping the data on those servers fully backed up and available. You'll have all the tools you need to distribute presentations to any number of players worldwide, monitor the status of those players. You'll be able to perform administrative functions such as creating additional users and assigning passwords, managing the roles and capabilities of those individual users, and there's a set of troubleshooting tools to help you remote troubleshoot players that may exhibit problems. It's a very capable, scalable solution, very reasonably priced. Now as we continue, I'll work through in separate modules the process of configuring a player for each of these publishing methods.